Welcome to the Living Life Juicy podcast, where we explore how we can be present and kind as we do great things. You can find the Living Life Juicy podcast on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platforms. If you're interested in video resources and insights on how people grow and groups develop, go to the Growing People podcast YouTube channel and blog. Along with other resources, we have created over 50 what we call explainer videos that introduce a complex topic or concept through short videos. We're talking between 1.5 and 2.5 minutes, where you can use those to introduce a concept and then start a discussion. You can find out more about Into Wisdom Group by going to intowisdomgroup.com, where we guide people and groups to their next best step towards growth and sustainability by designing experiences and resources to develop individual and professional organizations. You can also get your copy of my new book, The Pottery Panda, Art of Intentional Progress, at potterypanda.com. But enough of that stuff. Today, we're talking with Ken Lubin. Ken is currently a managing director with ZRG Partners with a focus across growth industries, and they are talent advisors. Over the past 22 years, he's had tremendous success in placing leaders in sales, business development, C-suite leadership, and operations. Ken and I met during the pandemic as we were both finding ways to keep people engaged in the virtual context, and we were helping others find their way as well. So Ken, it's also important to note, continues to be a competitive athlete with a love for the thrill of pushing himself to excel. He still competes in ski racing, bike racing, running, and endurance events. He's the founder of Executive Athletes and the Ultimate Hire blogs and podcasts. So welcome, Ken. So glad that you're able to join me today.
No, this is a blast, right? And it's been an amazing number of years coming from the pandemic when we first met to where we are now. And really the combination of the both, the digital world, the community world, and the work world have all come together. So no, this is great, right? And now we're on the forefront of the next thing, going into the world of AI and how that combines all this. So
yeah, and you're one of the people I would have never met except for the pandemic. And
right.
Our paths crossed, and I think we worked really well together. And we were able to not only help each other out, but there's other people who stepped in, your connections and my connections, and we were able to really help everybody take a step forward.
Well, and I think that's, sort of our world, right? And you were saying in my intro, I'm an executive recruiter. I've been doing it for 20 plus years. And what I've learned, it's your network, it's your connections, your ability to connect is probably more important. And everyone always talks about your network, but your network's only as good as you can make it, right? And really create and having that ability to connect people. And I think what I've learned throughout my years of doing this is really, you're not a recruiter, you're a connector, right? You understand what one person wants or needs or likes, and you connect them with the other person, right? And hopefully they can do business together. You make a placement off of it, you do a deal, or you become friends.
Yeah, it leads me into kind of the way that I lead off most conversations. I don't do the full bio/resume when I introduce somebody. I want you to be able to describe what you do. So if somebody asks you, Ken, what do you do? How do you reply? How do you respond to that?
The easiest way, I say I steal people, right? And it's probably the best thing, but no, I help people make transitions from one organization to another. And I have a passion. I do a lot of startup businesses. I do a lot of businesses that are ground floor opportunities, a lot of businesses that are coming from, say, Europe or Asia or Latin America into the US or vice versa. So most of the placements I do are really entrepreneurial type placements. They can be new entrepreneurial divisions within large corporations, or they can be purely from scratch. We've had a number of hedge funds and private equity companies come to us and say, hey, can you help me build this finance business? Can you help me build this business? And really, that's what our expertise is. We go out there, we find leaders, we then build a team and, help them, and sort of sell the dream in the same sense, to really say, hey, you come on board, you be successful, you can create generational wealth for you, your family, your company, and everyone's happy, right? And there's a lot of fun in that, a lot of pride in that, and to really see what people can do is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I do a lot of work with what I call my ideal client is one who either has noticed that they're going to be in transition or found themselves in the midst of transition. And it's most obvious in not only startups, but when startups want to become a going concern. If they're not just building to sell, there's going to be that huge transition of once it's started, now what do we do? So so what I do is I come inside and I'm not the financial guy, but I come in and help them help their organization become a structure that can be sustainable. And you can never do that. You're never just an organizational consultant. You're always a coach as well. So I blend those two things. And man, startups are so interesting. I imagine like trying to match somebody who wasn't part of the original startup with a startup organization. What are some of the challenges with that?
One of the questions I always ask people is, what do you do for fun? Right. And that's probably the easiest way to really figure out if they're going to jive or not. Mm-hmm. Is if people have a lot of connections that are, say you're a musician or you race cars or you're a sailor or something like that, usually by the point when I'm making the intro, they can do the job. It's really coming to the connection, right? Are they going to be the right person that's going to connect with the investors or connect with a partner that's really looking for the business? So that's what, I think ultimately that's probably number one, is to really figure that out. Number two, one of the things I've learned through my career and doing a lot of this stuff is there's experts who can take a business from 0 to 5 million. And then there's experts that take it from 5 to 50. And then there's experts who take it from 50 to 500 and then 500 to 5 billion, right? And you need to know who you are. And that's where people get in trouble. Serial entrepreneurs are great to get their business to, 5 million, 10, 20 million, right? But then they need to know their limits, that they can't go above that. And that's when they need to either hire a team, transition out, or figure out what's next, because they're idea people. The next people are the growth people, right? That take it from, the 5 to 50 million. How are these people? What are they? A lot of times they were previous executives in a big company who went to a startup, did that, and really learned that business. Yeah. Then there's the people taking it, to the, $1 billion level, right? And that's a whole other different breed. So it's really understanding yourself, understanding what you're good at, but also taking ego out of it and really understanding that it's not about your ego, that you can't take a business from 0 to 5 billion. We all have skill sets that we're good at, and we all have skill sets we're not good at.
I find it's interesting. If they're on your radar, they probably don't need, or like they're technically proficient. Mm-hmm. And if they're even on your radar, and that's true in most organizations I go into, they don't need more technical development. They're already smart. They're just, out of the park smart. But what they do when they want to develop, they try and get smarter instead of getting healthier. And that idea of, there's these great leaders who are technically proficient, but they're not really great leaders because they're not healthy. They don't know how to connect. They don't know they don't know themselves. They don't know what they're about. And they haven't developed those competencies. And that's like the biggest challenge is what they call the unconsciously incompetent, these technical geniuses who can't relate their way out of a paper bag. So
it's really IQ, right? IQ versus EQ, right? Is really what it comes down to.
Yeah. Well, and it's more than just emotional intelligence and emotional quotient. It's that. So I try and take a look at the whole leader. And I call it the total performer because I used whole leader when I was doing work for hire at a large corporate university. And really, it's about a total performer. And it's like not only emotional systems, but social awareness and social management, relationship management. It's about physical awareness. Like, do you know your numbers? Do you know when you're most effective? And then managing your life to align with that. And it's also intellectual and spiritual and mental, all these different things about awareness and management. You can't manage what you're not aware of. And even if you are emotionally intelligent, if you lack in other areas, you're going to fall short. I want to hear your story. How did you get here? Like, what's your the superhero Ken Lubin origin story? If we were into comic books, where did you come from, and how did you get where you're at right now?
Sort of a crazy story, right? Was really the ability to fog a mirror is how I got into the recruiting business. Was I had actually have a degree in sports science and more sports management. I came out of college. I was coaching ski racing for 2 or 3 years. I coached at Brown. I coached at one of the ski academies up in Maine. It was great. 2, 3 years. I was like, you know what? I can do this forever. And then my girlfriend at the time, now wife, said, we're not doing this. So that was the end of that. She lived the ski bum life for the third year, and that was the end of that. So I got into the recruiting business in '99. A friend of mine that I actually worked in a bike shop with said, hey, come on over. We're looking for warm bodies. Can you dial a phone? Can you try to talk to people? And the rest is history, right? We all, like many guys, came out of college. You don't really know what's going on. You end up in the boiler room type mentality, and type shop. I worked for K-Force, and that's exactly what it was. But what I learned along that way is during the dot-com boom, you could hire your friends and make $5,000 a head. So I started bringing all my friends in. Then they brought all their friends in, and we all had a blast. We all knew each other. We were having a great time. And that, did that for a couple of years. '01 hit, the dot-com world blew up, as we all know. I moved over to the firm I'm at right now. Little crazy story, but I ended up over here. And at this point, I got a phone call on a Sunday night saying, hey, about a month in, don't come to work late tomorrow. We're firing everyone and we're starting all over. So there was 3 of us, at the beginning, and I've outlasted one of the founders at this point. So I'm technically employee number 1, and now we're a 500 plus global executive search business. So it's been a crazy run, crazy ride, and it just continues to grow. Funny thing is, I was on a call this morning introducing, talking to a new guy, and I'm like, I've been here the longest, more than anyone, who probably knows the least amount of people that are in here, because I do my own thing. I'm in my own little world and go from there. But I've personally been part of startups, right, and been in growing something and seeing what it takes in order to get to that next level and what you need to do and everything else. And it's not really what need to learn and what need to do. It's more what not to do, right? I think is probably the better
how not to screw it up.
Yeah, exactly. How not to screw it up versus, hey, this is the right way to do it, right? And I think I'm hard-headed enough that I can just, that I'll just keep going. And it's there's definitely an evolution of that, right? It's an interesting business. I always like to say your product can think, and our sales there's 3 or 4 components to the sale. There's a sale to get the search, there's a sale to the candidate, the sale to the candidate to the client, the sale to the client to the candidate, and the sale of the deal, right? So there's 5 or 6 components to the deal to make a placement. And there's always one, there's always something going on, right? So you always try to have to stay a step ahead, but I've learned you can't be shocked when you hear something that happens or doesn't happen.
Now do you work mostly on referral or consignment, or what's your?
We do all retained business,
Retainer?
Right? So we
Okay.
do all retain executive search business. We compete with the Heidrick and Struggles, the Korn Ferries, the Egon Zenders. Those are the players that we compete with. And so it's, most of the stuff I do is, I'll pretty much do anything, but for the most, $150,000, $200,000 on up, sort of levels, and, above that, right, is really the place that we're playing.
Yeah. And are you doing both sides or is your main business the organizations that are searching, or do you also work with top executives who are on the hunt?
I do both, right? But our real commodity is the organization, and then we go find the people. So they retain us, and then we go out and find the players that want to come on board. So each search, you're almost, obviously our network, we know where to go and where to find these people, but you're almost starting over at each one because there's nuances of that. But in the same sentence, if I know someone, or I come across someone who's not the right fit for one organization, but they're fit for another organization, yeah, I'll do an intro there, right?
You
There's
keep
no
them, you
harm.
keep them in your Rolodex, to
You're
use
the
a sophisticated
Rolodex, right?
term.
That's sort of
Yeah.
what they say.
We
My
used to,
outlook.
yeah, we used to tell like when I was doing leadership development inside an organization, we would tell our supervisors as managers, always keep a stack of resumes available, even if you don't have any positions to fill. But ABR, always be recruiting, which is your world all the time. But for any leaders, man, especially nowadays, you need to have a full bench that you can start dialing. And instead of, we'd also tell them to like target people. Like if you see somebody, don't poach internally. Now that's your world, but for them, don't poach, especially internally, but keep your eye on people who you want to work for you.
And
And
it's being
make them know.
opportunistic, right? And it's really being opportunistic, right? And really understanding what you need or where you want to go. And I think most organizations are terrible at that, right? Usually by the time they call us, they've already exhausted their network. They've already gone through, their board connections and everything else. And then they come to us. And like you said, is always sort of always be recruiting, but a lot of organizations are terrible at that. And really getting to understand that, you always have to be looking for opportunities long term versus sort of closing the deal short term, right? And I think there's what I try to teach clients, what I'm actually doing a lot of writing about is how organizations really need to sell themselves, how they need to be consistent with their story and how they need to be cutting edge, because they're not Google, they're not Apple, they're not, the best players in the world that you have 100,000 resumes coming at them every day from Stanford and Harvard and everything else. You have to understand where you are as an organization. If you're an A player, you don't have to worry about recruiting. But if you're, a B or a C or a D player, how are you going to tell your story? How are you going to get that story across? And how are you going to be consistent with it? Because good candidates can sniff that stuff out. And again, it's sort of, it comes down to self-awareness. And if you know that you're a C player, if you're a stretch player, it's fine to B player, right? Someone who's there and who can help you take to that next level. And it's really understanding that. And I think that's the challenge organizations have, because again, like we were talking about earlier, ego gets in the way, and you have to overcome that challenge with the ego.
Yeah. And that couple of things off what you're saying. First is the idea of your story. And it's, when I come in and I'm helping an organization with their strategic planning and action, the very first thing I do is check their vision or their purpose statement and their mission. And if you can, and their behaviors, which I prefer to values, because if you go to their website and you look and like 10 other organizations in their industry have almost the same thing, people are going to look and say, okay, that's a brochure. That's not a reality. And so let's get it so that it is truly who you are. It's what you want to become. And then to me, a mission statement it's just defines your business. What do we really do? And if your mission statement is mushy, it means that they can't focus resources. And like you said, the top players can sniff that stuff out and say, if I take a job here, they're adrift. And their story is not strong enough to bring people in. But if you're an organization, even if you're a C-level organization and you have a strong story that you're telling, you're going to attract that stretch talent, and they're going to want to come and work for you, and you're going to keep your best talent. So that's, I think what you mentioned there is helping them know their story and adjust their story is huge. And also I think that idea of, the Eisenhower matrix of urgent and important. And recruiting is one of those things that isn't urgent until you've got spots, but is so important all the time. And the secret of using the Eisenhower matrix is to not let the things that are important but not urgent, don't let them slip into important and urgent. That's crisis. And if you can avoid the crisis, then you can imagine that you can deal with the crises that you can't avoid, because those exist out there too. So I want to hear a little.
The same. Go ahead.
No,
I was going to say the same thing goes, with candidates as well, right? If you're looking for a gig, you need to have your story dialed, right? That's the other piece of it. And sometimes your story doesn't mix with the story that you're going to go interview, and that's okay, right? And it's, don't try to conform to what you think that they want, because that never works well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
And that's like, we were just talking before we went on the air about, I have a whole bunch of friends who just got ripped in the worst possible way. And I think they need to do some healing, and then they have to review and edit the stories they're telling themselves so that they can tell that story to others. That's a huge piece. But I want to hear participation in extreme and your continued competitiveness in these adventure sports. How does that connect and inform your role as a talent advisor?
I like pain. It's it's, and since the pandemic, I've actually slowed down in competing. I still train like I'm going to go do them, but now all of a sudden the world has changed and everything else. But it's sort of just seeing what you can do, right? Is really what it comes down to. And it's seeing, hey, can I go do this? Can I go this long? Can I go this hard? Can I try that? Right. And I think the biggest thing is, once you sort of, commit to something and actually just try to get to that, like we're talking about, getting to the next level, and you can get there, and it's not as hard as you think it is, right? I remember the first like overnight race I ever did, and I was so worried about not sleeping, and oh my God, this is gonna be a disaster. And I actually talked myself out of it, like in the middle of the night. I'm like, I need to go to sleep, and I didn't, but I was outside my comfort zone. The next year came back and I was like, you know what? I'm not going to sleep for the next 3 days, and I don't care if I'm going to do it or not. Right. And then, you start preparing, then it's like, all right, let's go to a 5-day adventure race where you're not sleep, you're taking cat naps here and there along the way. Right. And seeing what you can and can't do. And I think that's really the power and success in business, the success in sport, the success in sort of, dealing with the demons between your ears. I think, I always sort of say endurance athletes are either running to something or running from something, right? And I think, and sometimes you're doing both, but it's also a way that sort of allows you to figure out what's going on. And are you coming to peace with yourself? I don't know if it's coming to peace, but just like, hey, sort of building a self-confidence that, wow, I can actually, I can do this, I can get through this. And the same thing is in the business world, right? We're talking about, there's so many components to putting a deal together that, if it blows up, you have to realize, all right, it's just a number. You're going to move on to the next thing. And it's so easy to get so emotionally tied into that. And once I really figured out not to become emotional with work, my actually performance went through the roof, right? I wasn't like, I always like to say it's the hope close, right? Or I hope I make it to the finish line. And by the time you're to hope, it's like game over, right? It's just start all over again. So, and I think that's really what I learned through doing, longer and longer type events, trying different things. Some of the things now I'm sort of transitioning to do more like strength workout. I've got a CrossFit gym in my garage, and, from being like a skinny endurance guy to, hey, let's see how strong you can be. Right. And it's sort of, and that's a transition, but it's fun. It's totally different. It's like, wow, it's, I'm 50 years old and you're putting up, some fun numbers. You're like, wow, this is pretty cool. And I think it's always sort of testing yourself, but also knowing that, where do you want to go? And I know at 75 years old, I don't want to be weak and out of shape and not be able to pick anything up, right? I want to be the guy who's, a total badass at 75 and you go out there and crushing it, right? And I think it's sort of looking at the long game versus looking at what's in front of you.
So I want to hear a little bit about your perspective on failure. And I don't shy away from that word because I actually think it's a helpful concept. But what's your perspective on failure and how it impacts your growth?
Failure is only if you give up, right? And then sometimes you have to give up to move on as well, right? And so what's failure? Like, I think to me, failure is like, all right, I have no money left, my house is gone, and I'm, living in the streets, right? And then in my head, I always say, well, what could I do if that all happened? What would I do next? And I think it's sort of preparing for that. It's probably the way I grew up, being a survivor, being like, hey, This is, I need to rely on myself. I'm not a great team sport guy. I like to, do things like, hey, sort of, let me go, let me, go out, let me go figure it out. And then I'll come back and tell you, and then let's go do it together. Right. That's the way I operate versus, following people. I don't know. I'm not good at that.
Yeah. I view it as, I mean, yes, there's that meta failure of, like you're saying, out on the street and stuff like that, but you haven't fallen off the face of the earth.
Right.
You're still there. You can still try. For me, when I think of failure, it's those in the moments tries.
Yeah.
And failure is an indicator of where you need to grow.
Mhm.
And you cannot identify that until you fail. And so to me, it's a marker of, oh, okay, I need to learn that. And I mean, the thing is, you can fail inside your comfort zone and you can fail outside your comfort zone. It's just giving you data and information so that you can accurately grow.
And it's not really failure, it's just learning what doesn't work, like we were talking about earlier, right? It's like, well, that didn't work. So how do we tweak it to make it work? Right. And is that, some people might call that failure. I'm just like, Thomas Edison, what he said, failed a million times. What he learned was he just found a million times that doesn't work until the one way does work. Right. And
right. And I just find that there's a lot of people who paralyze themselves because, number one, they're afraid of failure because they don't define it the same way you do.
Right.
It's like, I'm not even going to try because I might fail. In fact, I remember I worked at camps when I was younger, and we had now we call it a challenge course. Then they call it a confidence course. And it was a bunch of manila ropes holding logs and trees. Definitely before all the standards from ACCT and others. But I remember there's this one, I think it was in 5th grade, and he was like the stud of the camp. Everybody looked up to him, great athlete, all that kind of stuff. And he was standing on the far end of the swinging log, crying his eyes out. I said, what's going on? You got this. You can do this. He says, I might not make it. And that's what was keeping him from doing it. Even though he had all the physical capabilities, in his brain, he'd already failed. And to him, that was death.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talked him through it and says, so what? What happens if you fall? That's okay. You get to get back up and try it again and try it again. But it was the hardest thing for him to let go of the possibility of failure so that he could grow and learn. And so that to me is just a huge thing as I'm working and doing the, executive coaching and that kind of thing, is just getting people out of their head. And I love what you said about sometimes you need to give up before you can move on. And there's a lot of people who just don't even know that they need to give up, or that they don't even try so that they can give up and move on.
Right.
So
no, and that's hard, right? Because then people say, oh, you gave up. And it's like, well, it just wasn't working. Right. And it's like, all right.
Yeah.
So
sometimes giving up is the wise choice.
Right.
If I'm beating my head against the wall and the wall's not giving, giving up means saving brain damage.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, it's the ego thing that you talked about. When you set that aside and are able to say, yes, I gave up, mock me all you want, but I'm moving forward. Convincing people to either take a step sideways or even a step back if you want to progress, that's a big part of the clarity in coaching. It's you and I remember Frogger, right?
Yeah.
That game. That's a great illustration. I would use it in leadership development programs. I would put it up on the screen and we would go. It says, can the frog make it across if he just goes straight? No. Can he, if he moves straight and sideways, he still can't make it. There's times to avoid getting smashed by a truck. You got to hop back sideways and forward. That's the best path forward. It's not a straight line. It's an optimal line.
And it's one of those things. It's how do you do it? How do you create a learning experience with it, right? And believe me, I try to do it with my kids, and they don't listen to me at all, right? They need someone else to tell them. So I sort of gave up, right? I'm like, all right, this is what you need to do. I've been there, I've done it, and they don't. It's like it's worse.
That's when you got to put them in front of the right people.
Yeah, then you can put them in front of the right people, and all of a sudden,
mine's only 9,
right?
And he's still convinced that I'm an idiot.
Right.
I'm getting the pre-teenage eye rolls now.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I say something and you get the dad type of stuff. But when you put him in front of the right coach, or like he's in Taekwondo, so his master, those people can say the exact same things that I'm saying, and all of a sudden the light bulb goes off. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's so I think that's, again, that's human nature, right? It's sort of, it's part of the process, right? And then by the time they're 22, they're coming back home and asking you what to do and looking for money and everything else. So
it's amazing how you transition from the worst parent in the world and the dumb person to the go-to person. But I want to hear from you. You help people in their transitions, like what you said. I'd like to hear about maybe your biggest transition and how did you navigate it?
for me, it was hard to really go from being like a coach and an athlete to sort of into the corporate world, right? That was my biggest thing, was overcoming my identity. That was my identity. I skied Division I in college. I went to the Olympic trials on a bike. I was, a semi-pro mountain biker and coaching at Brown and coaching at CVA and doing all that. And like, that was my identity. And it took me, probably 10 years to sort of get through that. And that's probably one of the reasons why I kept competing, is to just really feel like I'm still connected to that world. And that was a big transition, and really understanding that. And this was in the mid 90s, early 2000s, where no one even talked about that stuff. And now there's people that focus on athlete transition. I was doing some stuff with the Olympic Committee, helping people make transitions from being Olympic athletes to, is it the real world, or, sort of moving on from their sport. And, that for me personally, was hard, and I've always dealt with anxiety issues my whole life. And I remember my anxiety was like through the roof during that whole thing, because who am I? What am I doing? Right. And really trying to embrace that. And once sort of you do, but you can still combine your passions with, your real life. And I have this discussion with people that are like, to me, the biggest fallacy is, follow your passion and go do what you want to do. That's the biggest crock of shit going, because you're going to hate your passion in like 3 years. You're never going to want to go, say you're going to go, I don't know, ride horses. And then you're going to want to go work, but I want to farm, right? Well, by the time you're working at the farm 24/7, you no longer want to ride the horse that was there. And I think there's a lot of, love what you do, but work is work no matter what, right? And really understanding that was another big thing for me. I could actually have way more fun doing my extracurricular activities than during off hours than I can, when I'm working, right? And and the way my wife and I talk about this, and I try to teach my kids this, is look at the best bang for your buck. How much money you're gonna, what's the best hourly rate you can make, so you can then live the life that you want. And if you break it down to that, it's like, all right, I need to make $50 an hour, $20 an hour, $200 an hour, right, to live what I want to live. Then all of a sudden you can reverse engineer the whole process. And it's like, oh, interesting, right? This is the number I need to hit. This is, say the house I want to buy, the car I want to buy, the lifestyle I want to live. I need X. Let's break it down to an hourly rate. And what's that hourly rate? Is it, like I said, is it $10 an hour? Or is it $200 an hour? And what do you need in between, to get there? And
have you heard what Mike Rose says about following your passion? Because he agrees with you on that. But he says, don't follow your passion, follow your opportunities and bring your passion with you.
Correct. Yes.
And that resonates with me. And I talked about the whole identity thing. I interviewed Tim Walter a little earlier, and then I have these sessions where he gets asked 3 questions, and he asked about a tough thing for me. I go back to when I was in college and I was playing college football, and I realized that if I wanted to get my degree, I couldn't give 8 hours a day towards practice. And I wrote a short story about walking down to the locker room and seeing my gear hanging in the locker, and I saw me. And I realized that in quitting football, I no longer had an identity. And it was literally passing my identity to the equipment guy and having to step back and, okay, this has been my identity for over a decade. Who am I now? Now, one difference is with the sports that you chose, you can continue to pursue them as individual sports, skiing and biking and extreme running, that kind of stuff you can do on your own, and you can still compete. It's hard. And I tried this later on. I joined a club football team when I was in my early mid-20s, and it was a blast, but it's not something that, it's not like golf that you can take into your retirement.
Right.
And that was a huge identity piece for me. And that helps me, like when I can identify that, oh, what they're doing is they're clinging to an old identity that's no longer them. And what they need is to create that transition, and they need to see who they can be, not who they were. So get them to redefine what success looks like for them, picture success, and literally picture it, put it out there. Yeah. So I think when you hit the identity piece for transitions, that's the first thing to explore. I know that when I was Rift 2017, I'm talking about my friends who just got laid off, and they got an email in the morning that said, you're no longer part of the organization. And they are having, they're getting some severance and things like that, but there was no process and no warning that it was going to happen. And the biggest thing for me, the loss of the paycheck and a steady income, that's challenging. But the loss of identity and community, that's devastating. And helping people understand, I don't imagine you probably are dealing with people with strong identity when you're placing them in executive positions, but they're still going to have to transition their identity from who they were at whatever organization they were to this new position. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think, you know what, I think COVID actually exacerbated that for a lot of people, right? I think their identities were, I'm the leader, I'm in the office, I do this, I do that, I travel, I'm, this person that no longer is that person, right? And I think there's a lot of, the mental health piece of that. And the mental, the bigger issue of COVID is the more mental health issues that came out of it versus the actual sickness piece of it, right? I think, if you're healthy, obviously it was terrible. A lot of people lost their lives and everything else, but just shutting the world down for 2 years wasn't even the best thing there. And I think we're going to be dealing with people coming out of COVID, mental health wise, much more, now than even then, right? Because they're recreating their identities, over and over again.
The whole idea of the Great Resignation was really the Great Reshuffle, because
Correct.
a lot of the individual contributors and a lot of the middle and upper management kind of had a chance to sit back and reflect. And a lot of them came to the proper conclusion that it was a horrible work environment and they needed to leave. For others, it was, they're not taking care of me and I need to leave. And the problem with that is no organization will take care of you. Yes, they can create a better work environment and they need to make sure that it's a healthy place to be, but they can't take care of you like you can. And I think this great reshuffling was all these people looking for, not all of them, but a big number of them were people looking for an employer that would care for them and take care of them. That's never going to happen.
No.
You will always know better than any boss, any manager, any organization of what you need. And so what I'm trying to get people to understand is this concept of you can be effective and content, but it's up to you. The contentedness has nothing to do with who you're working for. It's up to you. It's a locus of control. It's got to be internal. Same sort of, the idea of, yes, employers need to create a emotionally and socially safe environment, but they can't make you feel emotionally safe or socially safe. It just can't happen. You have to own that and make it work and know what your boundaries are. Same thing with efficiencies. An employer can make a great, get you all the tools you need, make sure that there's an efficient and safe place to work. But ultimately, it's up to you how you are going to manage yourself so that you get the right stuff done and stay healthy. So that's my, you got a soapbox.
No, I'm right there, right? What is it? There's an old Earl Nightingale quote that says, and this was during the Great Depression, is, you don't own your job, but you own your career, right? And once people realize that, it's a completely different thing. That if you're working for someone else, in reality, you have no control, right? I hate to say it, but they can control your destiny. And I think to really control your own destiny is, having the confidence in yourself, being what is it? Not, yeah, more of, you can be an intrapreneur versus an entrepreneur, right? And
Right.
really realizing what that is and be like, all right, boom. And I think that's where, everyone says like Gen Z or whatever is lazy, or the millennial. They're just the opposite. Those guys, all of them can figure out how to make money way quicker, faster, better than any of us. I have a 14-year-old who's putting stuff on Redbubble and selling stickers that she traced. And it's, they can figure, my 14-year-old now is like, oh, I need a new income stream, right? Because her restaurant gig is done in the summer. I'm like, when I was 14, I wasn't saying a new income stream. And,
Yeah.
she's 14 saying that. And I think there is just so much power in that. And it's our generation, is, the Gen X, we really, combine tech with the old school rotary phones, right? And,
Yeah.
the baby boomers are, scared of the tech piece. And, we're stuck in the middle. And then, the other ones, they only want to use tech. They don't even want to talk to people, right? And it's like, all right, you got to somehow figure that and bridge that gap. But the ability to own your own destiny is now as unlike it's ever been before.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we're lucky being Gen X, because like boomers and Gen Y and Z and millennials are all fighting, and we're forgotten like we always have been.
Right.
I heard I did a deep dive into generational studies a few years ago. And one of the things, that one definition of Gen X is the first generation that could be intentionally avoided, because it starts in 65 when the pill came in.
Yeah.
And then it ends in about 80 when the first baby on board sticker came out.
Yeah.
And so we were the generation that, latchkey kids and take care of yourself and all that kind of stuff. And Gen X, even the term comes from baby boomers, because X is the unknown, and they didn't understand our generation, so they called us X.
I saw this thing the other day saying Gen X is the only generation that was 30 years old at 10 years old and is still 30 years old at 50 years old, right? It's sort of the, the same thing.
Yeah. So I want to go into a quick lightning round, and just want quick responses. You're not signing a contract that this is what you think forever. It's just first responses. Have some fun with it. So first of all, what's your favorite book or media to give as a gift? What was the last book or media that you gave away?
You know what? So there's a book that I've sent to people, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, which is a great book. It sort of, allows, sort of frees you a little bit. The follow-up to that book is, We're All Effed, A Book of Hope, right? Those are two great, sequels that, I like there. There's always Think and Grow Rich, or always, things, that I send off to people. So it's really all about creating, in your own mindset and your own destiny.
Yeah, great. What about who are your heroes?
I've had this question asked before, and I don't really know if I have any heroes, right? I sort of emulate, like, hey, I like this from that person, I like that from this person, and really sort of, bring it all together. And I think, yeah, I'm not like a hero guy. Guys that I think are, and people probably hate me for it, like, sort of like a Lance, right? Lance Armstrong, even though what he did was terrible to people and everything else, I think he has a fascinating story. I think he knows how to win. I think, Tiger is, the same, again, but those, and it's not their personal lives, it's sort of their athletic lives, I guess, or, or ways to look at it. Guys, like in the ski world, like a Bodie Miller or like a Lindsey Vonn, like those are people you would like look up to if I was an athlete right now, because, of what they do and how they've done things and how they're nonconformist, right? I think I sort of like the nonconformist world and how they're, how they've been successful.
I like that. It matches your answer that your heroes are nonconformists, therefore they don't exist.
Right.
So I'll give you the question that kind of can stump people sometimes. It's about who do you quote most often in a book, an author, a movie, whatever it is. And it could be something significant, or it could just be something fun. And I'm talking to give you a chance to let this fester in your brain for a second. But who do you find yourself quoting most often? It could be an author, it could be a movie. I think of everybody between Henry Nouwen and Fletch. So who do you quote?
It's sort of, it's sort of cliche, but sort of like the Nike ad, right? Like sort of just do it, right? Or, I love sort of, be you or be great. And I think those are things that encompass just stepping out, right? Step outside the box and see, where you can go. I think, two guys that I really like, and I've been fortunate to meet one is like Seth Godin. I love Seth Godin. I love what he writes. He does not think the same as everyone else. He thinks, differently. I love his style. I think it's of an author that I think is probably one of the best business guys out there, one of the best thinkers, but someone who's very down to earth and willing to admit what's worked and wasn't work is Seth.
Okay, great. Well, Ken, thank you so much for joining me for this little bit here. Man, so much to tap into, so much to talk about. And if people know that this isn't just about executive advising and headhunting, what Ken's talking about is ways to be great, even if you're in the middle of a long-term career or you're an entrepreneur. So tap into Ken. You can find him at his website, Executive Athletes, kenlubin.me, right? Or
kenlubin.net.
.net.
I have another one called The Ultimate Hire, but I'm really going to combine all three of them and just put them on my kenlubin.net. So that's my next sort of branding thing, is to take them all together, because then it allows me to focus on the sports side, the business side, and it's not all one. So
connect with him on LinkedIn. There's not that many Ken Lubins. If he can find kenlubin.net, it means that there's not many out there.
Right.
And with that, I want to encourage you, if you heard something good here, whatever, be sure to like and comment and subscribe and all those other things, regardless of what platform you're catching this on. What I think you'll find is that the conversations that we have on Living Life Juicy aren't limited to the profession of the person who is my guest. I try and pick interesting people that everybody can learn from, and Ken is one of those people. So thank you for being here, Ken.
No, thank you. And thank you for having me. This was a blast. I could do this stuff forever. So